So we must do two things, two great things together, to encompass that enormous new view that lies before us, but to encompass it within the framework of science, to see it within the whole categorical framework of science, and to see that these two are not separate, but that they are wedded. The bigness of the idea, the newness of the idea, the greatness of it is one with the structure of science, the structure of being itself.
I will begin by telling you a little bit about the origin of this class. Actually, you know that this class is intended to be a further insight, a further vision to what we were doing last year together. And last year we were looking at that 7,000-year period standpoint of divine love, wanting to understand that more clearly, wanting to look more deeply into the question of the practice of the 7,000-year period. And so we did that to some degree, and we began to unfold within ourselves, within our own conscious understanding, to a greater and greater degree, what that 7,000-year period is and what it means. And for those of you who were here, we can recap together. For those of you who weren't here, we can give you a bit of an insight into what took place. Namely, that we were echoing and voicing the fact that the 7,000-year period standpoint of consciousness, the standpoint of divine love, really the standpoint of that seventh synonymous term for God in the order of the answer to the question, what is God, on page 465 of the Christian Science textbook, that as we began to look more deeply into the wonder of that 7,000-year period, the wonder of the fact that nothing has been dawning on mankind except the nature of God, except the idea of the divine nature of being as mind, spirit, soul, principle, life, truth, and love, that this accounts for the whole history of mankind. It accounts for the history of every individual who has ever walked this earth. It accounts for the history of, therefore, the individual consciousness, the collective consciousness, the universal consciousness. That there is, in fact, a deep structure, reality, pattern in being that is patterning everything, that is shaping everything according to itself, in the likeness of its own self. And that pattern is the pattern of those seven. Those seven, whether we call them days of creation, or whether we call them the seven synonymous terms, actually the 7 days of creation in the Bible, are the first great depicting of that sevenfold nature of God. And the Bible sets that forth. It sets forth that divinity, that divine nature that is taught by Christian Science, that is at the core of Christian Science, that is at the heart of the Christian Science textbook. In recapitulation, when she asks the question, what is God? Imagine after having covered all those chapters, how many chapters was that? 13, 14 chapters, and finally she asks the question, what is God? As though finally you are able to grasp the question and the answer, because you have gone the way of those first 14 chapters. Now I can ask you point blank, what is God? And so she will draw then from everything that she has given in those first 14 chapters to succinctly subsume the single most important question in the universe, in the world, in the individual consciousness, in the collective, the universal consciousness. The most important question there is, finally she asks it. And doesn't only ask it, but gives the answer. And apparently feels that if we have gone the way of those first 14 chapters, that we are ready to really get to the bottom line, to the real question. What is God? And the answer to that question, what is God? Through really 7 synonymous terms, which she qualifies in a fourfold way. She says that God is incorporeal. This is actually the word, a word sense. Divine, a Christ sense. Supreme, a Christianity sense. And infinite, a science sense. So God is incorporeal, divine, supreme, infinite mind, spirit, soul, principle, life, truth, and love. So she is gathering up, really, everything that has gone before, the whole of human history, the whole of biblical history, the whole of her textbook, gathers everything up then into that one question. And it's the one question that really was answered right from the beginning. Right from the beginning of the Bible. And you know that as Christian scientists, we root ourselves in our 2 textbooks, the Bible and the Christian Science textbook, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy. And so you really see that then, that when she closes out that chapter on recapitulation, where she has put the question, placed the question directly and clearly in consciousness, that then she really goes to the core of the answer to that question. And this is what we see in the Key to the Scriptures, where she presents the 2 chapters, Genesis and Apocalypse, gathering up really the sum and substance of what is taught in Genesis, with its main accentuation on the sevenfold nature of God. And she takes those days of creation then, you see. Having asked the question, then she can give the key to everything. And that key is, first of all, those 7 days of creation. And secondly, she gives the chapter Apocalypse, in which she focuses on the fourfold operation of God, so that we have the sevenfold nature of God and the fourfold operation of God. As we look more deeply into that fourfold operation of God, we see that it has a dimensional ontology within it. It has the ability to translate itself, to come to every level, to show itself forth on every level. So we'll find those 4 really bringing the 7 to every level of consciousness. Working, operating, moving. It's the divine dynamic that moves everything, that moves the nature, so that that sevenfold nature is not static. It isn't unmoving. It isn't waiting for you to know it, for you to be conscious of it, and then it will work. Isn't that wonderful? That something is working not because of you, but in spite of you. Not because of what the universe does or doesn't do, but in spite of what the universe does and what it doesn't do. That in fact the universe cannot do anything except to respond to the impact of this fourfold operation of being, this calculus, what we call the calculus. So we begin to get familiar already with our terminology, that when we speak about the calculus or the fourfold operation, these are one and the same. They refer to what we find really in Revelation, or in Mrs. Eddy's chapter on the Apocalypse, where she explains and renders understandable the city four square. St. John's great vision, his great revelation of the city four square, which is further understood at a yet further level as the city of our God, with its four cardinal points. And Mrs. Eddy therefore takes the 15th chapter to focus on the seven synonymous terms for God, the nature of God. And she takes the 16th chapter to focus on the fourfold operation of God in its operational breadth and its operational depth, meaning that those four are present at every standpoint, every level of consciousness. They come to every level of consciousness. They touch every level. They express themselves at every level of consciousness. So there is no level at which those four are not working, are not in expression, are not the only thing that is in expression. And bringing out what, as they express the divine dynamic, bringing out the nature of God in absolutely everything, at every point in consciousness. So wherever you are, wherever we are in our understanding, and that's where we have our existence, that's where we live and move and have our being, is in the understanding, in our understanding. What is our understanding? How do we understand being? How do we understand God? That's where we are. The where we are is not a locale or a location in time and space. It's a question of consciousness. And wherever we are in our understanding, even if we seem not to understand very much at all about the divine nature and the divine operation, we are never outside of that nature and that operation. We are in the divine dynamic. We are being moved by the divine dynamic. And everything that happens to us, everything that we think we make happen, all our goals, all our efforts, all our attempts to get somewhere and do something and be someone and so forth, we think that's within us to have that power. We either feel, yes, we can really make it, we can really get somewhere and do something and do what we want to do and achieve what we want to achieve and be what we want to be on the corporate ladder or the social ladder or whatever ladder we're climbing. But it's not really so. It's not really so. We think we're in charge. We're never really in charge. I hope you don't mind that. I think it's a great relief. I think it's a beautiful thing to find out that it's not up to me. It's not up to oneself. That something else is working. And that something else is so big and so grand and so beautiful and so involved with us. Really gives you the sense of love, that those categories of being, those categories that Christian Science teaches, the sevenfold nature of God and the fourfold operation of God and the infinite multidimensionality of that nature and operation, is working for you. And there's nothing you can do to enhance it or to stop it or to interfere with it or to change it. Absolutely nothing. But that nature and that operation is working on you, is changing you, is altering you. And all of the big changes and all the little changes, whatever changes we go through in our experience, whatever problems we seem to have in our experience, problems are really there, they are given to us, they are really shaped, they are tailored for us, given to us, in order that we will change, in order that we be changed. And we are being changed into the likeness of the divine, being changed into the form of the same nature as the divine sevenfold nature, being formed into the fourfold calculus. That's what's going on with us. So whenever you feel that you're super self-involved, and believe me, I know that feeling, I know that experience, where one is just so self-aware and self-aware of the present problem, the current experience, the demands on oneself, just remember, just back off in your consciousness. Back off and fall back into that safety net, that network that says there's a net that is holding you, a divine network that is holding you. And it's the network of the system of science. That system that is comprised of those categories that aren't just the categories of God, they're your categories, they're the categories of you. You are being, capital B, in expression. You are being, small b. You are that infinite one being in expression. How can anything that you do be outside of that? How can anything that exists for you be outside of that? How can we have an infinite one and something next to the infinite one? Something beside, so that somehow we have the infinite one, and then here is my problem. My problem, which is almost as big or bigger than, seems like, the infinite one, huh? So if we would just think in consciousness, reason in consciousness about what we are saying, about how we are reasoning, huh? If we would just come out from that infinite one, and reason truly in accord with it, we would find that there's nothing outside of the range and the realm of that infinitude. That everything is the one being in expression. That nothing is going on but that sevenfold nature of God operating according to the Christ calculus. The calculus is the Christ idea. It's the way the Christ idea works. How the Christ is going to work out the idea of God. Not your human idea. Not my human expectations. Not what I think is the utmost, the best, the most ideal. Not what the human considers ideal, but what the Christ knows to be ideal. To be in coincidence with the highest idea of God. This is what the calculus is working out. It is the Christ. So whenever we speak of the calculus, you know this is the Christ working. It is the Christ that has your best interest at heart, your highest good, the greatest excellence in view, and doesn't only envision that and have an idea of that, but is able to execute that, to bring that about, to carry that out to fulfillment, to complete fulfillment.